Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Weiss Maudi, and I'm from the legal department of the Foreign Ministry. I wanted to talk to you a little bit beyond what my colleagues have talked about in the political realm and the procedural realm, a little bit about legal aspects of possible events coming up in the UN in September. And from a legal perspective, on a macro level, some of the problems with what we call premature recognition of a Palestinian state, problems with the unilateral declaration of statehood on part of the Palestinians. I think we start from the very basic point that I think in many countries there is the oversimplified notion that recognizing a unilateral Palestinian move, recognizing a Palestinian state, will somehow bring about an end to the conflict. There's talk, well, there's been years trying to reach a resolution of the conflict, and we really haven't got there, so this way we'll push the parties to resolve the conflict. And I think on that first note, I think what's very important, and this is particularly from the legal point of view, needs to be kept in mind, is the fact that recognition of a unilaterally declared Palestinian state will actually bring about the intensification of the conflict rather than the resolution of the conflict. Both when we look at the permanent status issues still on the table, be it borders, be it Jerusalem, be it refugees, be it security issues, recognition of a Palestinian state that is declared unilaterally will not resolve these issues. They will intensify the conflict around these issues. Even if it's recognition with a certain set of borders or certain parameters for borders, certainly that will bring about an intensification of the conflict. And on this note, I want to point out that in Mahmoud Abbas's op-ed piece in the New York Times, he actually stated this specifically, that the move in September is designed to move the conflict from a political plane to a more legal plane and a legal conflict, and to use statehood as a springboard for a legal conflict with Israel. I want to take us a step sort of more on the micro level, beyond the permanent status issues. If we look in terms of day-to-day cooperation between Israelis and Palestinians, under the interim agreement, there are 40 areas of civil and security cooperation between Palestinians and Israelis. And there is actually, although this doesn't get much media attention, much success in this realm. If we look to cooperation on issues related to water or on taxation issues, it should be noted that 2/3 of the Palestinian economy, for example, are based on indirect taxes that are transferred as part of the arrangements under Oslo agreements to the Palestinian Authority. And we need to ask ourselves, what will be the day after if there is this unilateral Palestinian move in terms of the effect on all these arrangements that affect not only Israel, but also consequences on the other end, on the Palestinian end, in terms of their day-to-day life. Again, these are areas that there's been successful cooperation, and what will happen with a move that will basically unravel all these fields of cooperation. I also want to consider the legal frameworks that apply. Both on the international level, when we talk about Resolution 242, 338, the various political plans, the roadmap, all of these basic plans are based on the fundamental principle that a resolution of the conflict is to be mutually negotiated, and they come out against unilateral moves. If we look also on the bilateral plane, if we look at the interim agreement, for example, a very cornerstone of that agreement, a material provision of that agreement, is that neither side is to take unilateral action to change the status of the West Bank or Gaza. And this isn't just a bilateral agreement. We have to remember that the international community signed as witnesses the interim agreement, and indeed one of the quartet principles, the third quartet principle, is that the parties should embrace existing agreements. So a unilateral move is really a move against these existing frameworks. Also on the legal test that my colleague just mentioned, traditional legal tests of statehood include if there's a defined territory, if the entity has a defined population, if the entity can conduct international relations, and if the entity has effective control over the areas that it wants to announce statehood. Now, in terms of this legal test, particularly if we look at the test of effective control, there's a big question mark if the Palestinians would meet this legal test. It's curious that actually Mahmoud Abbas, in his article in the New York Times, skips over the test of effective control. Certainly, to date, even after reconciliation, which my colleague talked about between Hamas and Fatah, on the ground, the Palestinian Authority does not control the Gaza Strip today, does not have effective control of the Gaza Strip. The same could be said for 60% of the West Bank, which is Area C. And related to that is the issue of the reconciliation. And really think when we're talking to governments about the problems with recognizing a Palestinian state, we really have to point to this recent reconciliation agreement. Certainly, and I know that sometimes you say, well, it's going to be in a government of technocrats, but really, if Hamas is a major player in the Palestinian government, well then, recognition of a Palestinian state, in essence, is de facto recognition of Hamas. And as we all know, Hamas in many of your countries is designated as a terrorist state, as a terrorist organization, and it is also does not adhere to the Quartet principles, namely accepting Israel in any configuration whatsoever, denouncing violence, and accepting the agreements, as I just mentioned. One last argument, and then I want to touch a little bit about states that have already recognized the Palestinian state. One last argument is just talking about the snowball effect in terms of other conflict areas throughout the world. And I think we have to consider the implications for other areas throughout the world in terms of recognition, again, of a unilateral Palestinian move. Now, might ask, for countries that have already recognized a Palestinian state, well, what arguments can be made there? I think we can look at it in various different levels. First of all, there are the countries that only voted in 1988 as sort of a symbolic recognition. I think from the legal point of view, if we're looking at just the state that just had a positive vote in 1988, we can certainly say that at that time, the Palestinians did not meet the traditional test of statehood, and legal scholars will view this not as a serious recognition of the Palestinian state, but rather something more symbolic. And indeed, after 1988, the Palestinians themselves did not see themselves as a state, and international community, international organizations also did not accept them as a state. But if we're looking for states that more recently recognized Palestinians as a state, I think we again have to divide it into two categories. There's first the category where there was the establishment of full diplomatic relations, where that would be full recognition from a legal plane. And then again, there are more recognition which would be more symbolic. I think in the latter case, we could still make the arguments against full recognition of the Palestinian state. But I think beyond that, even if we're talking about a state that already recognized, I think we have to divide between what was done on the bilateral plane versus what is going to be done on the very politicized plane of the UN. And again, my colleague talked about the various scenarios in the end. We're not sure exactly how it will play out in the UN, but definitely there are much broader implications for a move in the General Assembly, or be it in the Security Council, in terms of the conflict. And again, thinking about how such a politicized move will affect the conflict and deepen the conflict instead of resolve the conflict. Thank you.